You know, back in 1498, a single voyage literally ripped the map of the world in two and then stitched it back together in a way nobody had ever seen before. It was a journey that promised unbelievable riches and exotic spices, but what it really delivered was a brand new age of empire, one that would change the course of history forever. This is the story of Vasco da Gama. And it's a fair question, right? How does this whole epic saga, full of incredible discovery, shocking brutality, and world-altering consequences, all start with just wanting a more flavorful meal? Well, that and a truly obscene amount of money. And that kingdom? It was Portugal. See, Portugal's tucked away on the very edge of Europe, and for decades, its sailors, with the king's backing, had been painstakingly inching their way down the coast of Africa. It was a systematic mission, charting the unknown, all driven by this one incredibly bold and super risky ambition. To really get what was driving them, you have to understand just how crazy valuable spices were. We're talking pepper, cinnamon, cloves. In the 15th century, this stuff wasn't just for cooking. Oh no, it was a status symbol, it was a preservative, it was even medicine. Spices were literally worth more than their weight in gold. The problem? Getting them to Europe was a huge, huge headache. And here's the source of that headache, the Republic of Venice. They basically had a stranglehold on the whole trade. Spices had to travel this long, dangerous overland route, passing through countless middlemen, which made them incredibly expensive. Venice was getting filthy rich, and pretty much everyone else, especially Portugal, was paying a fortune. So the Portuguese king at the time, John II, he has this idea that is both super simple and completely insane. He thinks, What if we just sail around Africa? I mean, if they could find a direct sea route to the spice markets in India, they could cut out the Venetians, the middlemen, the whole shebang, and grab control of the most profitable trade on the planet. Now, this wasn't some idea they just cooked up overnight. Not at all. This was a massive, state-sponsored project that went on for decades. They sent spies over land to figure out where the markets were. And then, the big breakthrough. In 1488, a guy named Bartolomeu Diaz actually proved you could sail a ship around the southern tip of Africa. The door was officially open. But there was still one last piece of the puzzle missing. They needed one more expedition, led by one more captain, to connect the two ends, to sail from where Diaz turned back, push across the totally unknown Indian Ocean, and finally reach the spices at their source. The man they chose for the job was Vasco da Gama. And man, what a journey it was. Seriously, nothing like it had ever been tried before. We're talking 2 years, 4 ships, 170 men sailing into completely uncharted waters, all the while facing deadly diseases, starvation, and the constant threat of attack. So they leave Lisbon in July of 1497. By November, the crew has been at sea for over 3 months without seeing a scrap of land, a world record at the time. After making their way up the African coast, they get a lucky break and find a local pilot in Malindi who knows how to cross the Indian Ocean. And in May 1498, they make it. But the journey back? It was even worse, a brutal, harrowing trip against the monsoon winds. I mean, just look at this map. It really puts the incredible scale of this into perspective. The total distance they sailed was longer than the entire circumference of the Earth. And see that big arc out into the Atlantic? Da Gama did that on purpose, a brilliant but super risky move to catch favorable winds. It took his ships into a vast, empty ocean no European had ever seen. And just that one leg of the journey, more than 3 months without seeing land, covered over 10,000 kilometers. For a sailor in the 15th century, that is an almost unimaginable feat of courage and navigation. And this monument right here, this marks the spot. May 20th, 1498. They'd done it. History was made. For the first time ever, there was a direct sea link between Europe and Asia. So, the main goal of finding the route? A massive success. But the other goal, of opening up trade? Well, that's where the story takes a turn. Yeah, Da Gama completely misread the room. He shows up with these gifts, some basic cloth, a few hats, barrels of oil. To the Zamorin, the incredibly wealthy ruler of Calicut, this was just insulting. He basically saw them as pirates, not ambassadors from a king. So the trade treaty, absolutely not. So having failed at diplomacy, da Gama returns to India in 1502. But this time, he's not leading a small group of explorers. This time, he's in command of a heavily armed war fleet, and his mission has changed from trade to pure terror. What happened next is, well, it's just horrifying. This quote is from an eyewitness. On his way to Calicut, da Gama captured an unarmed ship full of pilgrims. He stole everything, locked the hundreds of men, women, and children inside, and then set the entire ship on fire, watching as they burned. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some isolated act of cruelty. This was his strategy. He inflicted these kinds of gruesome punishments on local fishermen and sailors to send a terrifying, brutal message. Do not mess with Portugal. After terrorizing the seas, he just turned his cannons on the city of Calicut itself, an unfortified city full of civilians. His goal was no longer about getting a seat at the trading table. It was about violently kicking the table over and taking the entire thing for himself. So, how are we supposed to make sense of this guy? The man who pulled off one of the greatest feats of navigation in all of human history was also responsible for some of the most shocking acts of cruelty imaginable. His legacy is, well, it's complicated. On one hand, he's the pioneer. His voyage absolutely shattered the Venetian monopoly, made Portugal an incredibly rich world power, and completely redrew the map of global trade. But on the other hand, he's the perpetrator. His tactics of extreme violence and terror became the blueprint for centuries of brutal European colonialism. You just can't separate the two. And the economic shift was just immediate and total. It was like flipping a switch. The Venetian monopoly that had dominated Europe for centuries, it crumbled almost overnight. All that power and wealth shifted to Portugal, who grabbed control of the spice trade, and the world was launched into a new era of global empires built on sea power. You know, these two pictures really say it all, don't they? Over in Lisbon, he's buried in this magnificent tomb, celebrated as a national hero. But in India, there's just this simple, weathered monument marking where he landed. Let's just say the memory of his arrival is very, very different depending on which side of the ocean you're on. In the end, Vasco da Gama's journey did so much more than just open a trade route. It connected the world like never before. Sure, but it did so at the barrel of a cannon. It kicked open the floodgates to a whole new and often very brutal chapter of world history. Which leaves us with a really tough question, one that we still wrestle with today. When one person's actions create so much but also destroy so much, how do we tell their story? What does it even mean to be a great figure in history?